All right, so today we're really diving into some fascinating stuff, extraordinary human abilities, you know. We're talking about things like shamans and inexplicable surgeries, the kind of stuff that makes you wonder what's actually possible.
Yeah. It's
You sent over a couple of documents. Here's the translation of the first 4 chapters of the document, .pdf, and also Jacobo Grinberg-Zylberbaum. And I have to say, after looking over them, I'm pretty intrigued, but I'm not sure I see the connection between these two.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, actually. The connection is what makes this so fascinating, you see, because what we're really going to be exploring is the intersection of these really ancient healing traditions with modern neuroscience.
Okay.
These documents provide us with kind of a window into that very space where traditional practices and really cutting-edge scientific inquiry, they kind of meet and intertwine.
Okay, you've got me hooked, for sure. So who are we meeting first on this deep dive into the extraordinary?
Well, our first document introduces us to Don Lucio Campos, a granacero shaman. He's from Morelos, Mexico. And right off the bat, Don Lucio claims to control the weather.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty bold claim to start with, right?
Yeah.
But what I find particularly interesting is his belief system. It revolves around these beings called time workers.
Time workers. Okay, now I'm really curious. What are those exactly?
So imagine spiritual beings that inhabit a plane of existence that kind of runs parallel to ours. They subtly influence our world, but we can't really see them. But it's a concept that's found in a lot of different shamanic traditions, this idea of an unseen world intertwined with our own.
Okay, so it's not just Don Lucio and his beliefs. This is like a whole system, a way of seeing the world. That's really fascinating. And how does someone become a granacero shaman? Is there a specific initiation process?
There is. And Don Lucio's experience is, well, pretty intense. He says that in order to become a granacero shaman, you have to be struck by lightning.
Yeah.
And you have to survive, of course. It's seen as an initiation, like a sign that you're meant to walk this path.
He's not kidding, is he? He was actually struck by lightning.
He was, over 30 years ago, actually. And he sees it as this catalyst for his journey as a healer, as a mentor. It's a powerful testament, I think, to how deeply these beliefs are woven into the very fabric of their lives.
Yeah, that's incredible. It makes you wonder if there's some kind of neurological component to these types of experiences. Could a traumatic event like that actually trigger changes in the brain, leading to these different perceptions of the world, you know? I'd love to hear more about the neuroscience perspective a little later on.
Definitely.
But for now, I want to delve a bit further into these shamanic traditions. Is this belief in connecting to a spirit world and influencing nature, is it unique to Don Lucio's practice? Or is this a common thread we find in other shamanic cultures?
Oh, it's definitely not unique to Don Lucio. When we look at these shamanic traditions, I mean, all over the world, you know, it's really pretty amazing. The Amazon rainforest, the Siberian steppes, indigenous cultures right here in North America.
Yeah.
We find this recurring theme of a spirit world that can influence our own. And shamans are often seen as those who can connect to that realm, you know, seeking healing, guidance, maybe even trying to influence the elements.
It's true, yeah. It's like this, well, almost like this primal urge we have, you know, like this deep-seated desire to understand those forces that shape our lives, even if we can't see them, or maybe especially because we can't see them.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, you know, what else is out there that we haven't even begun to understand? And that brings us to our next story, which, well, this one's a real head-scratcher. Even compared to controlling the weather, we're talking about Doña Pachita, a Mexican shaman who is renowned for something called psychic surgery. So, what does that even mean, psychic surgery?
Well, psychic surgery is this phenomenon, right, where practitioners claim to actually perform surgeries, but they don't use traditional instruments. Instead, they often use their bare hands. It's a practice that has always been, well, it's shrouded in mystery and a lot of skepticism, especially from the medical community, of course.
Okay, well, before you delve deeper into this, I have to admit, the skeptic in me, I mean, it's already doing backflips. But I'm also really captivated by this. So tell me, who was Doña Pachita and what exactly were these abilities that she was known for?
Doña Pachita, well, she was a controversial figure, to say the least, even among those who believed in her extraordinary healing abilities. She claimed to channel the spirit of the last Aztec emperor while she was performing these procedures. So imagine this. People would come to her with all sorts of ailments, and she'd operate on them. but with her bare hands.
Wow.
Sometimes even appearing to pull out tissues or foreign objects.
Okay, hold on a second. So there's debate about whether she was actually performing real surgery.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate. Some people reported these amazing healings after they saw Doña Pachita.
Yeah.
Their ailments just vanished. But on the other hand, others, including some medical professionals who actually observed her, they weren't convinced.
Oh.
They suggested that maybe it was more like sleight of hand than actual surgery. And it's that mystery, coupled with the fact that there are no clear scientific explanations, that makes it such a fascinating and divisive topic.
It's definitely fascinating. There's no doubt about that. But I'm also trying to reconcile this with everything we know about biology, about medicine. So is there any kind of scientific framework that could even begin to explain something like psychic surgery? Or are we talking about something completely outside the realm of what we consider possible?
That's where our second source, the work of neuroscientist Jacobo Grinberg, that's where it gets really interesting. Because Grinberg's theories, they might provide a bridge between what we think of as scientifically possible and these seemingly impossible abilities.
Okay, I'm ready. Who was Grinberg and what was his big idea?
Jacobo Grinberg, well, he was this fascinating figure in neuroscience. And he argued that our brains generate what he called a neuronal field. Think of it as an energy field that extends beyond our physical bodies.
Oh, an energy field.
Yeah, and it's created by the electrical activity in our brains. And Grinberg, he believed that this field could actually interact with the world around us in ways that we're only just starting to understand.
An energy field generated by our brains? So are we talking about like an aura? Is this where the idea of psychic abilities comes in?
You could think of it like that, yeah, like an invisible aura.
Yeah.
But Grinberg, he believed it had the potential to interact with matter and energy on a much deeper level. Sort of like, how electromagnetic fields can influence the physical world around us.
Okay.
He thought that this neuronal field could be the key to understanding all sorts of phenomena. Telepathy, clairvoyance, even maybe psychic surgery.
Wow, that is a radical concept. But how would this neuronal field actually work? Like, how would it allow someone to perform surgery with their bare hands?
It's definitely pushing the boundaries of our current understanding. Grinberg's idea was that a really highly developed neuronal field, maybe amplified through specific practices or states of consciousness, could allow individuals to interact with matter at, like, a subatomic level, like influencing the very building blocks of the human body, manipulating them with the power of the mind.
That is some next level stuff. It's exhilarating and also a little terrifying to think about, But it's still a pretty big leap, right? Going from influencing matter on a subatomic level to removing a tumor with your bare hands.
It is a huge leap, no doubt about it. And it's important to remember that Grinberg's theories, they were often met with a lot of skepticism from mainstream science. There's still no real proof that this neuronal field even exists, let alone that it can be harnessed to do these things.
Yeah.
But it gives us this really intriguing framework for thinking about the potential of the mind and its ability to interact with the world in ways that we might not fully comprehend yet.
So we've gone from weather-controlling shamans to psychic surgery to this mind-blowing theory about energy fields generated by our brains. It's a lot to take in. But I'm curious, have there been any documented cases of psychic surgery being investigated scientifically? I mean, what does the evidence actually say?
That's a great question. And there have been attempts, to study psychic surgery in controlled environments. But the results, they're often pretty inconclusive.
Okay.
Some researchers, they claim to have observed things that can't be explained conventionally, while others remain skeptical. They often cite the potential for trickery or misinterpretations.
It sounds like we're wading into some pretty murky waters here. With claims as extraordinary as psychic surgery, it seems like you'd need some really rock-solid scientific evidence to back it up. But what about things like telepathy or clairvoyance? Did Grinberg's work offer any insights into those kinds of abilities?
He did. Grinberg's research went beyond psychic surgery. He was really interested in the potential of the human mind for what we call extrasensory perception. And his work with evoked potentials, or EPs, it offers a fascinating glimpse into how our brains actually process information and how that might be related to these shamanic practices.
EPs. Okay, I need to hear more about this because so far this whole deep dive has been anything but ordinary.
So EPs, in a nutshell, are these electrical signals that happen in the brain, and they're triggered by, stimuli or events that happen externally.
Okay.
Grinberg did these experiments where he showed people the same symbol, right? But here's the thing. Some people, when they saw the symbol, they interpreted it as a number, and others saw a letter,
Wait, so the same symbol was interpreted in completely different ways depending on the person. How is that even possible?
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about it, right? Ginsberg, he discovered that different areas of the brain were actually activated depending on whether the person saw a number or a letter. And what that suggests is that our brains aren't just passively taking in information. They're actively interpreting it. They're assigning meaning to it.
So our perception, our individual interpretation of the world, it actually plays a big role in how our brain processes information. That's amazing. But how does that relate to, say, a shaman's ability to see into someone's mind or to communicate with spirits?
That is where it gets really, really interesting. Because what Ginsberg's research hints at is the possibility that our brains might be hardwired for more than just processing sensory information from the physical world.
Right.
His findings with these EPs, they suggest that there might be this neurological basis for how we interpret meaning, how we connect with ideas, and maybe even how we tap into realms beyond our immediate sensory experience.
Okay, this is where my mind starts to bend a little bit. So you're saying that a shaman, maybe through years of training or rituals, maybe even by inducing altered states of consciousness, that they might be able to kind of hone their ability to access and interpret that information that most of us, we just filter out.
It's a fascinating possibility, and it actually ties into Ginsberg's Syntergica theory. And that theory basically proposes that achieving greater coherence between the two hemispheres of the brain, that could be the key to unlocking these really profound levels of human connection and understanding.
Enhanced coherence. Could you maybe unpack that a little bit for us? What does it mean for the two hemispheres of our brain to be more coherent?
Okay, so imagine your brain like an orchestra. When all the instruments are playing in sync, when they're harmonizing, you get this beautiful symphony, right? Well, that's kind of similar to what Ginsberg was talking about with brain hemisphere coherence. When the two halves of your brain are working together in a more synchronized way, you get a heightened state of awareness, enhanced cognitive abilities, and potentially even access to information or experiences that might seem, from our everyday perspective, well, they might seem psychic.
Wow. It's incredible to think that we might all have this hidden potential inside of us, this capacity for extraordinary connection and understanding. But if that's the case, then why isn't everyone walking around reading each other's minds or seeing into the future?
The million-dollar question, right? Ginsberg believed that most of us haven't even come close to tapping into our true potential. And he thought that certain practices, things like meditation, mindfulness, maybe even exposure to specific sound frequencies, that these could help to cultivate that greater brain hemisphere coherence and maybe unlock some of those latent abilities.
So it's like we've been given this incredibly complex, powerful instrument, our brain, but most of us are only using a tiny fraction of its capabilities. It really makes you wonder what we might be capable of if we could tap into that full potential. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's maybe bring it back to the human side of things for a moment. We've been talking about these incredible abilities, but it's important to remember that these are real people, right? With their own stories and experiences.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the fantastical elements of these stories, for sure. But at the core of it, we're really just talking about human beings trying to understand their place in the universe, trying to heal themselves and others, trying to connect with something bigger than themselves.
And isn't that what we're all trying to do in one way or another?
Exactly. These stories challenge us to really expand how we define what's possible, to question our assumptions about reality itself, and to approach the unknown with, maybe with a bit more wonder and open-mindedness.
It's true. And speaking of approaching the unknown with wonder, that leads us to another fascinating individual from your research. We talked about Don Lucio and his connection to the spirit world. We discussed Doña Pachita and her really controversial healing practices. But there's someone else I'm really intrigued by. María Sabina. What can you tell us about her and her unique abilities? María Sabina, from what I understand, was a curandera, right? Like a shaman. And she was from Oaxaca, Mexico, known for these healing ceremonies where she used psilocybin mushrooms. What was it about her abilities that made her so unique, even among other shamans?
Well, she was really revered for her insight, into the human psyche. People who participated in her mushroom ceremonies, they claimed that she could, it's almost as if she could see into their very souls. She'd recount their deepest fears, hidden traumas, even past lives. It was like she was tapping into something beyond our normal awareness, something those mushrooms allowed her to access. It's both fascinating and a little unnerving at the same time, to think about someone having that kind of insight into you. Did she ever explain how she was able to do this? to see into people's minds with such clarity.
It's like she was tapping into a source of knowledge that's just beyond our everyday awareness, something those mushrooms allowed her to access. It's fascinating and also a little unnerving to think about someone having that kind of insight into you. Did she ever offer any explanation for how she was able to do this? To see into people's minds with such clarity?
She attributed her abilities to the mushrooms themselves. She called them her holy children. She believed that they allowed her to talk with spirits, basically, and access this realm of knowledge beyond the physical world. And, well, while that explanation certainly aligns with traditional shamanic beliefs, it's interesting to think about how Ginsberg's research on those evoked potentials, how that might offer another perspective on her abilities, a more neurological one.
Right. We were talking earlier about Ginsberg's experiments and how they showed that our brains, they don't just passively receive information, but we actually interpret it, We give it meaning even when we're presented with the same stimuli. So how does that relate to María Sabina and her ability to, well, you said it was almost like she could see into people's minds?
Exactly. See, Ginsberg's work, it suggests that our brains are constantly filtering and interpreting the information they receive from our senses, right?
Fair.
And that interpretation, it's influenced by our beliefs, by our past experiences, by our expectations even. And so what María Sabina might have been doing, maybe through her deep connection with the mushroom and her understanding of its effects, was accessing a level of perception that kind of bypassed those filters.
It's like she was seeing past the surface, beyond the constructs that we build around ourselves, and somehow tapping into this raw, unfiltered stream of consciousness. That's a really powerful concept. But how does this idea of heightened perception, of bypassing our usual filters, how does that connect to this idea of a neuronal field that can interact with the world around us?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while we can't definitively say that Ginsberg's neuronal field theory explains María Sabina's abilities, it does give us this really interesting framework for thinking about how our minds might actually interact with reality in ways that we're just beginning to explore.
Right. It's almost like we're just scratching the surface.
Exactly. Like, what if our thoughts, our intentions, our very consciousness, what if they generate this field that extends beyond our physical bodies? What are the implications of that for healing, for communication, for how we even understand what it means to be human?
It really opens up a whole Pandora's box of possibilities, doesn't it? I mean, what if we could learn to consciously cultivate and direct this neuronal field? What would we be capable of? Healing ourselves, healing others, maybe even influencing the world around us with our minds? It's both exhilarating and a little bit daunting to think about.
It is. It really is. And, it's easy to get swept up in the fantastical elements of these stories. But I think it's important to remember that at the heart of it, we're really just talking about human beings. Human beings trying to understand their place in the universe, trying to heal, trying to connect with something bigger than themselves, which is something I think we can all relate to on some level.
It is, absolutely. It's like this deep-seated human need to find meaning, to find connection, a sense of purpose,
Exactly. And these stories, they challenge us to really expand our definition of what's possible, to question our assumptions about the nature of reality itself, and maybe, just maybe, to approach the unknown with a little more wonder and open-mindedness.
It's true. And, as we wrap up our deep dive today, I think that's a really important message to leave our listeners with. Just because we don't have all the answers doesn't mean we should stop asking questions.
I completely agree.
The human mind is capable of extraordinary things that we might not fully understand yet. But they deserve our attention. They deserve to be explored. So to everyone listening, keep asking those questions. Keep exploring the possibilities. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of your own mind. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.